Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful Motherverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll show up here in my chat room. The chat room is on the screen because I have no guest today, and we can communicate directly. And I hope that you're having a lovely day. I hope this is a lovely week for you. Here in central Illinois, it is relatively warm after having been quite cold. It is today 46 degrees right now, which is a veritable heat wave compared to what it was. And I am certainly glad for that. I I certainly am familiar with Midwestern winters. I grew up here, um, but I do tend to like the warmer weather. Hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. I'm wearing my mother's lucky frog pin today for um, no particular reason except it wanted to be worn. Hello to Nikki Dodd in the chat room. It's good to see you. Our subject for today is what are these things and who do they serve? And if you're familiar with the story of Percival or Paradur, you'll be familiar with this line, which also shows up in some other contexts. Um, and it is the line that goes with the Grail procession. If you're not familiar with the Grail procession, let's go through the story of Paradur for a moment. And in the story of Paradur, he finds himself at the palace of the Fisher King, who is an elderly, crippled king. And during his time there, there is an unexplained procession. And this procession includes two young men carrying a sword, which is dripping blood, and a young woman carrying a grail, which is basically a cauldron in its original form. Some versions would have her carrying either a head or a skull. In some cases, there is a grail with a head or a skull inside. In other cases, it's just a grail. In any case, um, the um, the question comes up: what are these things, and who do they serve? And this is something that I think is very important to apply to all parts of life. We were talking yesterday um, about looking at our present and our future and the things we want to see. And we've been talking a little bit about critical thinking skills. Asking yourself constantly, what are these things and who do they serve? It's a very good practice. Um, Lady Bitterwind, my my beloved altar sister and former first elder of the Corellian tradition, used to have a song that she was very fond of from the Filk oeuvre, um, called Up to the Dusty Attic, I believe it was called. And part of that song was what was the question. And hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. Mary says, hello from beautiful Nashville. Um, and so it is. Ask the part of the song is ask yourself, who does this serve? And very often, if you look at situations from the point of view of who they benefit, um, it will tell you some things about them. Now, it's possible to reach wrong conclusions this way, but it's always good to ask. And I think that we're coming into a time where we really need to be looking below the surface of things and asking ourselves, what is this and who is being served by it? Um, I could give you a dozen stories out of the news that would benefit from this analysis. But I will give you one. And on his page this morning, Ed the Pagan is talking about the fact that in the new House of Representatives, not a single woman was given a leadership position. There are, of course, a number of congresswomen, but they have not been given um, the leadership of any of the committees, for example. Hello to Maggie De La Yata in the chat room. It's good to see you, Maggie. Now, if we look at this and we ask ourselves, what is this and who does it serve? To me, this is obviously part of that 2025 Christian dominionist, patriarchal, somewhat misogynistic, well, very misogynistic protocol. It is rather to have been expected, but to see it is something we should take note of. Now, it is not to be expected that every committee would have a congresswoman leading it, but none out of all those committees they have, and all the congresswomen who are there, not one could be put in such a position. That says something, and that serves a certain agenda, and we should be paying attention. And if we're not, we have no one to blame but ourselves. Now, is that the end of the world? Of course not, but it is one more little step in a certain direction. Does it mean it's not something that cannot go back later? No, it doesn't mean that at this time. And Reverend Mary says, rise up, O uterus. Absolutely. This is something that particularly women should be taking note of and should be paying attention to. Because, of course, it affects them most of all. But men, at least reasonable men, should be taking note of it too, because it affects us. Because reasonable men know that the right person for any given job may be of any given gender. And this idea that only this very narrow set of people can be in positions of authority is not really beneficial to anyone except that narrow group of people. Now, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that narrow group of people think, oh, this is perfectly fine. It doesn't, it's not any kind of problem. I perceive it as a problem, and I perceive it as fulfilling that Christian dominionist agenda. And, I see people talk about being afraid of people being rounded up and sent to concentration camps, which I think for the most part, at least in terms of the pagan community, is probably excessive. I think that it's more a matter of getting us out of the public court. But I think we're going to find a lot of efforts to do that. And I think that it's going to be entirely on ourselves to keep our presence in the public discourse. We have to make ourselves seen. We have to do it in reasonable ways. We have to continue to be part of the public discussion. Because I think we're going to see a major attempt to say that probably that we're harmless nuts, but not really serious people to be listened to. That has often been the mode of attack. And granted, there are worse attacks that can be made, but we need to be mindful of this, and we need not to further it through our own actions. We need to be sensible in how we present ourselves, and we need to keep presenting ourselves. At least that is my thought. Are we going to see are we going to see more destructive actions? We may. Certainly, some other communities can reasonably expect that. And some of those communities are part of our community also. And what are we going to do if we see that? That's something we must be thinking about. how are we going to react? Are we going to simply stand by? Are we going to try to affect it politically? Um, are we going to try to provide aid to people who are put in a position of danger? These are questions that we should be asking ourselves now, not when push comes to shove. And, maybe this is all paranoia. Let's say that this is a paranoid line of thinking. That would be the most wonderful thing in the world. I hope that is the case. I don't think it is the case, but let's hope it's the case. However, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, as the famous saying goes. And also, being prepared is always wise, even if you never face the situation. So I think that we must be prepared for a variety of challenges, at least in having an idea of what we will do to face them. And if we never face them, hurrah, how wonderful will that be? But, I can think of a number of places we're already facing them. I can think of Witches Fest USA in New York, which has had very disruptive protesters for many years now. I can think of the U-Haul Nazis in Nashville, who show up suddenly in U-Hauls around the city. Um, from various different sources, I think we must expect to see unwelcome actions. And what do we do about it? And we need to be thinking in those terms now. And there are, of course, only limited options um, that are possible, but those options still exist. And one of them is not simply permitting things to happen, speaking out against them, standing up against them, um, in legal and respectable ways, for the most part, I think is probably desirable. So, for example, if you find yourself with a U-Haul full of Nazis, um, don't put yourself necessarily in immediate danger, because it's to be assumed that Nazis are violent. But to the extent that you can, prevent them from making their point. Chase them out if you can. Knock them back if you can. I remember years ago there was a Nazi march in Skokie, Illinois, and um, the Supreme Court upheld their right to have the march. But the local people were, of course, outraged. And they had their march, but they were so heavily protested that the real news was that they were basically run out of town. And I would love to see people have that reaction to U-Hauls full of Nazis. Um, Simply not accepting it. And, we'll see what is possible. We'll see also what we're facing as we go forward. But there's no question that there are certainly some forces in the world which do not bear goodwill toward our community, or other communities that overlap with our community, and which very much want to have a confrontation. And, we must not simply be passive in how we react to that. We also need to be practical. And, one of the things I so often see when these questions are asked is people making totally impractical, impossible to implement responses. We don't need to even deal with that. We need to work with what we can do. We need to be thinking of what we can do and thinking of what will be effective, not just having a moment of emotional mess. So often in the pagan community, and I assume in other communities as well, when this subject comes up, you get people who respond with that moment of emotional masturbation. They make something that makes them, they make a statement that makes them feel really good about making it, but which is completely impractical and impossible to actually do. And that just wastes energy. And this goes back to something I was speaking about, well, earlier this year, many times this year, picking your fights. We need more than ever not to waste our energy in impractical and unnecessary conflicts. Um, and hello to Bianca Mora in the chat room. And I'm um, talking at present about the rise of Christian nationalism and Christian dominionism, and um, and how we are already starting to see this being played out in society. So going back to the story I was referring to, the fact that out of the entire House of Representatives, not a single congresswoman could be placed as the chair of a committee. What are the congresswomen to do about that? Well, there are only so many things they can do, but they certainly can complain. They certainly can call it out. Um, they certainly can be less than cooperative with those who wish to sideline them. They don't have to just um, step back and do nothing. They are, by virtue of their being congresswomen, in a position of some power. Um, and yes, for the next couple of years, it's unlikely that we will see any women in that position, judging from this act, and going by the priorities of Christian dominionism. But that does not mean that we will not continue to see congresswomen um, in positions from which they can be active in many ways. The other thing, of course, they can do is speak to the public, speak to their constituents. Um, one of the things that might be a very, very practical commentary on this, on the part of um, a congresswoman who might feel that she should have been in the position of chairing one of these committees, is to point out that, this is not just an act against her, but against her constituents as well. It's a diminishment of their influence. And, again, I cannot see any reasonable explanation that out of the large number of representatives in the House um, who are female, that not one could have been put in charge of the committee. I think it says a great deal um, about where certain people want things to go. And during the next couple of years, we have to expect that things are going to go in that direction. Um, and again, how do we respond to it? And silence really is not the way. But neither is, well, again, neither is emotional masturbation. Practical consideration and practical action, whether it's writing your representatives if you don't like what they're doing, or if you do, whether it is going out to make your voice heard in one way or another. These are things that we need to be looking at. And as I say, for our community, and I think part of what we're going to see is an attempt to move us out of the public discourse as much as possible. We need to find ways to make sure that we stay in that discourse, that we cannot just be shuffled off to the side. And there will be a lot more to be said about this, and who knows exactly how things are going to go. Um, we shall certainly see as we go forward. But we've been given, I think, a pretty good warning of where Christian dominionist forces wish to see them go, and where they will try to make them go. And we need to be thinking about our reaction to that and our own long-term plans for the future. Because the plan that brought Christian dominionism to its current position of power was a 50-year plan. And you can go back through that 50 years and watch the steady growth. We need to be thinking of our own 50-year plans. How do we make a lasting change, not a momentary reaction? How do we build our infrastructure to stand for the future, not just for the present? How do we build our community, or at least that part of our community that is willing, into a force that can survive and thrive through whatever comes, and last into the future with practical structures and practical actions? And I've said before, and I will say again, those who can work together should, and those who can't, you should go and do whatever they're going to do. But we should not dissipate our energies by working with people who do not really share the same goals. I was talking yesterday about a recent essay by John Beckett on the subject of political magic. And he pointed out that one of the big problems to people's attempts to do political magic is a lack of shared objectives, even when they overall agree. This community has always had a large section of contrarian behavior who will go out of their way to disagree even when they actually agree, who will go out of their way to oppose things they actually want to see come to pass. And I'm sure we'll have people who will do that. And we need to simply go around them, not allow them to block the way. How do we do that? Well, by not giving in to them, by not listening to emotional arguments when we know what we need to be doing. As I was saying yesterday, I feel that this time period, and I'm going to go a little farther and say this time period around the solstice and coming up on the new calendrical year, is the time we really need to be thinking in terms of our long-term plans, in terms of how we want to relate to things. And when I say we need to be thinking about that, I mean you need to be thinking about that, because your conclusions may not be my conclusions. But we're all living in the same world. And I think that we need to really put some thought into this. And that thought is not on an immediate emotionally satisfying outburst. That is a waste of time and energy. It is a typical thing, particularly in our current society, things that way. That is not a practical reaction. Practical reaction is what's going to work and how do we do it. What will get us to where we wish to be? How do we pursue that? And of course, the other question, are we clear on where we wish to be? Are we clear on where we need to go? And certainly as a community, we are not anywhere near agreement on that. Though certain parts of the community may be in agreement on that in their own ways. And part of that is I don't know that at this exact moment that we have great clarity across the board in what we're dealing with. Having been aware of the Christian Dominionist movement all this time, having watched them, I have no particular question, certainly, of what they want and how far they would be willing to go to get it. Whether that is going to go forward and in what way is another question. But I don't think there's any question what they want, and what they want is a world in which they are the only people. And anyone else is in a suitably submissive role. And that's a world that many of them, they had, by and large, a couple of generations ago. And yes, all the marginalized communities that we're talking about, including ours, did exist then. But they were, for want of a better way to put it, kept in their place. And I don't particularly think that the goal is to eliminate us so much as to put us back in that very marginalized place. But I think that if we allow that to happen, we are very foolish. We have spent years fighting to have the same civil rights that other people have. Or to put it more bluntly, the same civil rights they have. Because there are plenty of other people besides our community who did not have equal civil rights. The Christian Dominionist movement basically wants a world in which they are first-class citizens and everyone else are second or third-class citizens. And we should not allow ourselves to be returned to that state. We were certainly in that state when I was born. And I remember growing up with a lot of secrecy and fear about the wider society, a lot of paranoia about the wider society, and I will tell you, it's no way to live. And I am much happier as a free and equal citizen than a member of a marginalized and oppressed community. And I think that we allow that to be taken from us only if we're absolutely foolish. And at the same time, we must be very practical in how we protect those rights. And we'll talk a lot more about what might be a practical way to do that. I've talked a little bit today about what I think are some practical things we can do, keeping ourselves in the public discourse. I've always said that if we want to control our image, if we want people to see us as we are and as we wish to be seen, then we must control our image. We must be the ones putting our image out there. I think that's more important now than ever. And we must continue it. And the many stupid little political arguments that go on in this community are utterly ruinous. And insofar as possible, all of us who wish to move forward need to avoid them. But that's my opinion. I hope you find it helpful. And at this point, I need to take a moment for a message from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors. And here we go.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our next auction, I believe, is for tomorrow. Learn more on the Gaia Thrift page on Facebook or at whatnot.com/Gaia Thrift Central. And join us for the auction. We should have some interesting things. With that, I want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow with my regular Wednesday guest, Chris Copeland. And I hope to see you then. We'll probably have a more upbeat conversation than today, although I think today's conversation was an important one. Certainly not the most fun conversation, but I don't know that we're living in the most fun times. And I think we need to pay attention to what is happening. Now, with that, thank you again for joining me. I will see you tomorrow, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to continue to be with us and guide us as we go forward. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to be practical and mindful in our thoughts and our actions, to move us forward to the places we wish to be and the things we wish to do, and the world we wish to live in. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, and knowing you are always with us, still from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always. I will see you